It's Tank Talks Asia. Hello from me, Manisha Tank, and the rest of the team. So here on TTA, we will occasionally jump into a story of regional and global interest. We'll unpack and try to make sense of it. So picture this. It's the day before Halloween 2025, and across the world, two photo ops in South Korea dominate headlines. In the first, China's President Xi Jinping and the US President Donald Trump shake hands at a small airbase in Busan, preceding a meeting in which, among other things, they'll discuss trade and rare earth mineral export controls. In the second, Jensen Huang, the CEO of US chipmaker Nvidia, enjoys drinks and fried chicken at a local restaurant with the bosses of South Korean behemoths Samsung and Hyundai Motor. So joining me to unpack what a handshake and a fried chicken meal means for the rest of us, here is Curtis Chin with me in the studio, chair of the Asia Fellows, senior advisor for global markets at the Milken Institute. He's also a former US ambassador to the Asian Development Bank, and you are an advisory board member of the Asian American Federation, and you're just in from the Philippines.
Yeah, and what a trip in between two typhoons. So great to be with you, but how could I miss being on this show with you?
Okay, well, I'm really grateful that you're here, and we will talk about that super typhoon because I think there is some quite intrinsic relevance in the conversation we're about to have. Joining us down the line from Dubai is Sam Olsen. He's a geopolitical strategist, an expert on Chinese-Western relations, author and podcaster of States of Play, Understanding the Changing World Order, and chief analyst at Sibylline. Sam, I'm a bit confused because apparently you're in Dubai, but normally you're based in the UK, right?
Yeah, correct. I'm just in Dubai to give a lecture on the future world order and how the Middle East is going to fit into that.
That I expect is going to be fascinating. But let's crack on and focus on Asia today. How did we get here? US President Trump has recently swung through the region. Curtis, first of all, what did you make of the trip to Malaysia, Japan, and then South Korea?
Well, first, let me say, I also was just in Dubai, and one of the messages there, or I was in Saudi early too, they're like, we are Asia too. So I'm looking forward to hearing more, maybe on a future episode about the Middle East, because the Middle East is Asia very clearly. The president's trip, I've been in and out of 4 U.S. presidential administrations. There's always a lot of attention on does the president go or not go. Clearly the U.S. president can't go to every summit in Asia. APEC and the East Asia Summit of the ASEAN kind of summit are important ones. For me, in some way, it was just a success that the president showed up. Yeah. And, at the Milken Institute, we're always talking about connecting and convening. The reality is that there were some short-term terrific results. Will they be sustained? And that's the key. Will this U.S. engagement and involvement be sustained? So what President Trump did, kudos to him for being engaged and involved. And I think about all that happened in all of these things beyond those two interesting photo ops, one from Korea, of course, but also just that the president was engaged and involved with ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which has grown to 11 nations now, is a terrific accomplishment. But I think we're learning the reality is great photo ops, but what is the follow-up and sustainability of some of these efforts?
Very briefly, because I want to take it to Sam in just a second. The fact that he did turn up, does that not underline the geopolitical significance of this region right now?
Well, absolutely. But I don't want people in the future to say, oh, the president didn't turn up this year, so they're not significant anymore. But very clearly, it might seem like President Trump's been there a long time, but he really just got in January 20th. But to the degree that, again, his earlier trips to the UAE, to the deal regarding Gaza. This president is making very clear that he's engaged in the world. In some ways, I saw that this event was kind of a placeholder for the bigger event next year, which will be the APEC summit that will move to China. And some people say it'll be also the occasion of an official state visit by the U.S. president to China. He loves these grandiose photos and headlines, but again, it's what gets done. It's also critically important.
Yeah, and coming out of that meeting with Xi Jinping, he talked about going to China. I think that was a fairly big deal. Sam, I want to take it to you. I certainly think there is something to say about US President Donald Trump turning up in China's backyard at a time where he knows he needs to negotiate. What do you say?
I completely agree. And for so long now, Southeast Asia has felt itself in the middle of the crosshairs between China and the United States, and there are many countries which are saying that we, actively want to retain that balance. There are some countries that are moving much more towards China, for example, Cambodia and Laos, and some countries that are really keen on keeping very good relations with the United States too. But the difficulty for Trump is how do you actually bring something to the party which people want? And that's why the chips element, the semiconductor element is really important, because Southeast Asia is at the forefront of the battle between the two superpowers on the race for the fourth industrial revolution and the AI race, and seeing the relaxation of the issues between them on chips, I think is quite good news for Southeast Asia, because it allows many countries, most countries in fact, to retain that balance for a bit longer. Whether that's possible forever is probably debatable, but for now, this does mean that Southeast Asian countries are not having to make that final decision on which side to support while things are still up in the air.
And I'm assuming that therefore that's a good thing for the Southeast Asian nations, isn't it?
I agree, yes. If I was a leader in, I won't mention any names of countries, but in country X or country Y, then I think that it would be very much at the top of their agenda is to work out how to continue this balance. Because for now, both superpowers are needed as partners. And I think that actually there is the opportunity for Southeast Asian nations to be able to push the agenda, their own agendas, to make sure that they can maximize the benefits from keeping those balances by playing it well with both sides. I'm not sure how long that will continue for, though, as the relations between China and the US get worse and worse. And if something happens over Taiwan, then I do think that we will see countries forced to take sides.
Okay, Sam, thanks for that. Curtis, a bit more reflection on this, because what do you think Malaysia, Japan and South Korea got out of it? There were lots of photo opportunities. We had a new premier, we had a new prime minister in Japan, Sanai Takeuchi. That was an opportunity right out of the gate in her leadership to be able to say, look, we have a relationship with the United States of America and it's going to be a strong one. And that was a really big deal. It made a lot of headway in the news.
There's an amazing photo which went viral of the new head of Japan walking down a staircase with Trump and surrounded by all these other Japanese men. But I think for me, that was a critical part of this trip too. Everyone's focusing, of course, on ASEAN and APEC. But that re-strengthened relationship between the United States and Japan was a key step forward. Also, there was, again, a meeting between Korea and the U.S. It will be interesting to see how that one continues to evolve. But I don't say peace is breaking out, but at least we saw even movement between Korea and China. So the degree that, again, countries are coming together is a good thing. There are critics of, what the president of the United States is doing. But for me, that there is engagement is so important. If we're at all to move forward, these nations need to talk. And so, yes, U.S., China, they're talking. Each side is actually almost playing a game where they're trying to, for the U.S., get access to more critical minerals, for China to develop its own domestic chip industry. So in a way, there's a game being played. At least there's no war as each side focuses on trying to move more forward. But that U.S.-Japan relationship, the U.S.-Korea relationship, the U.S.-ASEAN relationship, we saw steps moving forward because of this trip.
Yeah, absolutely. But at the end of the day, there was that meeting that, and I was actually on air that week and covering the live breaking news when Trump and Xi Jinping met. And, everyone goes into a frenzy sort of talking about what is the nature of the handshake? What is the symbolism? What can we read from their body language? All this sort of stuff happens. But the reason it happens is because, and Sam, and I want to take this to you, is fundamentally, we still are in a difficult place because we're talking about two fierce competitors and we're talking about two ideological competitors. I wonder, is that still the case? Where are we with US-China geopolitical relations right now? And I know it seems like a really obvious question, but sometimes we cannot be dominated by the headlines we read. You spend your time, Sam, studying this quite deeply.
I think it's actually a very smart question because lots of people straight after that photo op said, oh, this is the end of the difficulty and we're going to be seeing a permanent thaw now. And I just don't see that, because if you go to 40,000 foot and try and work out what this grand strategy of both the countries are, the America and China, they have very differing views of what the future should be. And China is under no doubt that it wants to become a great power, the world power, at least the Asian power by 2049, almost certainly a lot before that. It wants to reunite or unify with Taiwan, and also wants to win the fourth industrial revolution, which is really important. I think it's the most important element. And that means winning the AI race. And for China to achieve all that, America needs to give up a lot of strategic aims: dominance in Asia, support for an independent, or not independent, but non-unified Taiwan. And also, America wants to win the AI race for itself, and it sees its companies like Nvidia and Apple and Google and everyone trying to push forward. But as Jensen Huang said, China is very close to being the top dog in terms of the AI race. And if that happens, that's going to really cement a lot of China's leadership, not only in the world, but specifically to Southeast Asia and Asia more broadly. And that means that countries that we've already spoken about in Southeast Asia or Japan or in Korea, they're looking at these two giants continuing their struggles against each other. And if you think that China is going to win a lot of the strategic elements, including the fourth industrial revolution, the AI race, and general dominance in the region, then it becomes a much more difficult conversation internally as to which side you're going to support, because no one wants to end up on the losing side in a big titanic geostrategic battle.
One of the things, Sam, that happened that day they met was Blackwell chips. Nvidia's Blackwell chips did not come up in the conversation. At least that was the headline that was put out. And this is quite significant, right? Because these are the chips that are these possibly the most advanced chips? These are the ones that China would probably want access to? Or is China close to having its own version?
China is very close to having its own version, and Jensen Huang said as much a few days ago. But in my own research, it is incredibly clear that China is ahead. And just very quickly, if you could imagine that the chip supply chain is an alphabet between A and Z. And America has probably about 10 or 12 letters it controls, and relies on Taiwan for the rest of it, for the few other countries. China controls much more of the alphabet in terms of the ability to actually produce these chips at the supply chain level. And this is an issue for America because it hasn't quite worked out that it is very good at the cutting edge of AI, but it is not necessarily very good at the broader ability to create the chips in the first place. And China knows that if you take Taiwan out of the picture, America fundamentally cannot win the chip race, cannot win the AI race. And this, for me, is a big red flag in terms of the future of Taiwan in the coming years, especially as we move towards artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence beyond that, because Taiwan becomes much more central to the geostrategic race. And China not wanting to really make a fuss about getting access to the most advanced chips says to me that, yes, it's confident it can achieve lots of things without American help, but also recognizes, I think, that America itself is probably on the back foot now, especially when it comes to the semiconductor supply chain. And all this points to a continued issue at the strategic level between the two sides, which is probably going to increase in tempo as we get towards artificial general intelligence, and the race for AI hots up even more.
So, Sam, this is why we need you, because I interview a lot of people and we talk about this a lot, but this is the first time I'm hearing this. Curtis, what are people saying to you about this fourth industrial revolution? And Sam made a really interesting, well, very important point there about, I mean, effectively, we're talking about the likes of TSMC, we're talking about the chip factories in Taiwan, which has had pretty much, the reign over that market for a very, very long time. What are you hearing in your circles?
It's a mix. We at Milken, we had on the sidelines of a prior APEC summit, this very much came up, at that time. There was talk about, because of various incentives, would companies be building more chip facilities in the United States. And a point was made, it's not just about the physical facilities, it's about the mindset, do we have engineers? And the United States doesn't. And so it's almost like a tension between, the US's immigration policy, but then a policy also to encourage more domestic innovation. And that's still unresolved. At the same time, when I talk to people, for them, to be honest, it isn't like the in the world of finance, this isn't the most necessarily important issue that dominates what they're thinking about to the degree we talk about U.S. and China. Clearly so critical. But there's a world of things happening in this region and between the U.S. and China that go beyond chips. One interesting thing that I'm hearing about now is that we haven't really talked about tariffs. They go up and they go down.
Yeah.
But less worries about the United States and what they're doing with tariffs. Supreme Court may accept or not accept. But how is China handling it? And will they flood our part of the world, Southeast Asia, with inexpensive products and all the criticisms that maybe come from Europe and the US about Chinese products? Will we now see in Southeast Asia? Thailand, where I live, usually has a very difficult time right now economically. And there's growing concern there and in Vietnam about a flood of inexpensive Chinese products that will lead to job destruction, company destruction in Southeast Asia. And will that lead to more and more of a backlash than we've seen in the past against China? So there are nearer term issues with people who aren't involved day to day with chips, real businesses, real jobs, real people. And the China presence, like the American president, isn't uniformly good or bad, but there are bigger worries now about China than U.S. behavior in my part of Southeast Asia.
So here in Asia, it's in everybody's interest if we see these tariffs reduced. I mean, a lot of people would say disappear, but they want to see some sort of détente. So what we do know from that meeting and what came out of it in terms of the statement was that the export controls on rare earth minerals, which are critical to infrastructure development in the future, and to this race that Sam talks about, those have been removed for up to a year. Now, I thought, again, that's another really interesting point, because everyone in Asia, all the big nations in Asia, China, is dealing with an erratic administration. And this means that what you're actually doing is kicking the can down the road. Am I reading that right?
Well, one, I think there's a lot of meaning in that word erratic, which often will sound negative. But others is the person crazy, or is he crazy like a fox?
Or some could say pragmatic.
So for me, this kind of disruptive approach to diplomacy isn't all bad. And I think too often he's all bad or he's all good. But for me, when you look at how things are evolving under this administration, to be honest, President Trump has 3 years left.
Yeah.
Unclear how much time Xi Jinping has left. Could it be 30 years? Could it be 8 years? Who knows, right? We don't know. And so people are already thinking about the future. And to your question, I think in general, some people say kick the can down the road. But in some ways, each side is playing for time. But if war happens, all bets are off. And for better or worse, this very clearly is a U.S. president that says, let's not have more war. Is that a strategy? But hopefully it's not just a strategy. It's a good approach that focuses on engagement and conversation, even as each side is busily trying to overcome what are these very real concerns. And so hopefully, isn't that how it should be? Yeah. That each side figures out how they can get ahead and not resort to war and violence between nations. That is a good thing for me.
Yeah. But Sam, you're sort of talking about this as a race. It does feel very competitive, and it sounds like something that can always be on the brink of a war. What would we need to see to make sure that that scenario is avoided? What do you make of the fact that China used this, and did they use this rare earths, critical minerals card vis-a-vis the US and the US's tariffs?
I think what's important to note is that we, for many years, decades now, have had what we call a purple global economy, which is made up of red and blue. And America's all the blue and, say, China's all the red. And the purples worked because there's been, as Neil Ferguson said, a Chimerica approach. But both sides are now reckoning that they have to move apart from each other, and we are looking at the bifurcation of the global economy, and we call this the Great Split. And the problem for Southeast Asia and Asia more generally is that, again, caught in the crosshairs is the way they find themselves. And I think that there will be increasing demand from both sides to be either a blue player or a red player, as the purple ability to have it both ways disappears. And this is being driven partly by China, but also perhaps more so by America, who demand countries take their side when it comes to pushing back on China. And you will see companies in the region, but across the world as well, being forced to say, okay, well, maybe I'm not allowed to deal with China if I've got American contracts, and vice versa. And this is a big issue because it's going to increase costs. Just in time logistics have gone out of the windows now, just in case. Stockpiling is increasing. And the things that China is doing, especially with its rare earth export controls, are making it much tougher for countries and the companies that exist within those countries to really be able to work out how to deal with the future. And so in this great split environment, which doesn't necessarily need war, people will find it hard. What will be very, very tough, though, is if there is a contretemps, for example, over Taiwan or the South China Sea, where you do see some kind of blows exchange between America and maybe Japan and Australia, etc., on one side and China on the other. In which case, the companies from those countries will be forced into positions they really don't want to, and that's going to disrupt the global economy, perhaps in a way that hasn't been seen for generations. So this is an issue that I think most companies and governments need to be planning for. The problem is that when you see headlines that say, oh, things are back on track between America and China, it does allow those who don't want to prepare for the worst to think that they're getting their own way. And that is, I think, an issue that is going to bite a lot of countries and a lot of companies in the years to come.
Well, look, we've got just a few minutes left, and there was a question that I wanted us to address. And actually, you've sort of raised it already, Curtis, because you said that you'd come in from the Philippines. A super typhoon was barreling into the country, more than 1 million people evacuated. This follows a typhoon the previous week, which made its way across Southeast Asia. We're thinking more and more in an existential way. We're talking about survival. And to what extent does that supersede some of the things that we've been talking about? Where is that red line where we say, wait a second, we talk about war on one hand, but it feels like we're fighting a war against ourselves, and only partnership and only collaboration solves for some of those problems. I wanted to get your reflections first, Curtis.
Well, first, my heart goes out to you. I lived in the Philippines for nearly 4 years, sitting on the board of the Asian Development Bank. And I was there for there's something called the Magsaysay Awards, which is kind of the Nobel Prizes of Asia. It's been interesting to see, how countries respond to assist the Philippines. And so hopefully it's not just the U.S., but China and others can play a role. But I think importantly, what is also playing out in the Philippines, as elsewhere, from Nepal, to Morocco, is that young people in particular are outraged about corruption, all these issues that hold nations back from addressing fundamental problems that we say are like intractable. But the reality is that some of the young people are like taken to the streets. And so in the Philippines or elsewhere, I think countries know best what they need to do. And it's not assistance from the United States. It's not assistance from China. Will they address, I've made up this thing called the little brick. Will they address the bureaucracy, the regulations, the inequality, and the corruption that has made these natural disasters even worse in terms of the people's response? And so I think we need to think about the everyday things that countries and people need to do, and not just think, oh, China or the United States are here to save the day.
Yep.
Countries know themselves, companies know themselves what they need to do. And that includes addressing this bureaucracy, this regulation, this inequality and corruption that holds countries and companies back.
Yeah. And I do think that living for today, thinking about today's problems, is related to the longer term plan. Sam, just finally for you, China reportedly has been within itself at the forefront of EVs and trying to develop more sustainable infrastructure, and chips will be at the heart of climate tech. Is there a notion that there is some thought going into this sort of existential process, this existential thought process, as we stare down the face of climate change?
Yes, I think so. I mean, first of all, it's important to note that 2/3 of China's electricity is still produced by coal and fossil fuels. And so most Western countries who are importing Chinese renewable energy inputs, for example, solar panels, whatever, are in effect outsourcing their pollution. And that's something that's not talked about. But I'm actually very optimistic about the future for the push against climate change, because I see the way that AI is able to really change things, and artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence will revolutionize, for example, nuclear fusion technologies. And we're already seeing massive improvements in nuclear small modular reactors and other renewable energy sources, thanks to advances in chip design. And all of that combined gives me immense sense of hope for the future. The trick is to make sure that those benefits are spread across the world, and rather than just on the Chinese sphere or the American sphere or so on. But I think that will happen because most countries look at it in their interests. And imagine a world where we've got, in effect, free, limitless and renewable energy. That will change the lives of so many people for the better in ways we can't even begin to imagine, and will help the planetary fight back against climate change. So fingers crossed, that is something that we can be hopeful about in the years to come.
Thank you. What an amazing way to come out of the discussion. Thank you both. Just lastly, Curtis, we always ask our guests who come into the studio to bring us a little memento that they can leave with us. And you've actually brought something beautiful from the Philippines. Just tell us what this is.
I brought you from the Philippines a little Capiz shell box. It's all about, think local. But attached to it is actually the lapel pin I wore at the Ramon Magsaysay Awards. For those who don't know, Ramon Magsaysay was a president of the Philippines who sadly died in a plane crash. And way back when, in the late 50s, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund created what has, in a way, become the Asian Nobel Prizes, the Ramon Magsaysay Awards, which they honor, their phrase greatness of spirit, but leaders in Asia that, regardless of race, gender, religion, are in a way showing a way forward, and for me, that's a great thing to spotlight on your show. You go online, learn all about them, but there's so many of these great individuals and organizations across this Asia Pacific region, which I hope that you, Manisha, will continue to focus on as we talk Asia.
Let's work on it together. I think we can manage something great. Thank you so much for that, Curtis. Thank you also, Sam, for joining us from Dubai.
Thank you, and I'll bring you something over when I see you next.
Brilliant. We would love to have you in the studio to talk more about that fourth industrial revolution. And that's it for this episode. I'm Manisha Tank from me and the team. Thank you so much for listening. And please don't forget to subscribe and follow Tank Talks Asia. That way, you'll be supporting our mission to bring you the real story of what's happening here in Asia to the rest of the world. And you'll never miss an episode. Tank Talks Asia is an AsiaWorks production.